and we are heading to the Auckland Art Gallery because I want to explore some Maori artwork, and apparently that's the best place to do it. So I should just share. New Zealand has these teeny tiny birds I keep seeing everywhere. Hang on, where is it? Oh my god, it's right there. Oh, there's one. There's one. See teeny tiny birds. They're everywhere. We have similar birds in Australia, but they don't survive in big cities. But yeah, my thoughts. I think wherever we go, we bring our perspectives and understandings from home with us. So for me, when I go to an art gallery and it's reflecting on colonialism and dispossession from land as someone from Australia, because of my knowledge of Australian colonialism and the history of there's no treaty, sovereignty was never ceded in any formal way to this day. And because of how violent Australian colonialism was, like there were frontier wars, epidemics, and up until there's arguments about the end of it, at least throughout parts of the 20th century, there were stolen generations where children were removed from parents and they were taken and put with either white families or put in these giant kind of orphanages sort of things to kind of like civilize them. And so, and like through all of that, like there was like a process of trying to breed out blackness. So Australian colonialism I know a fair amount about. So whenever I go anywhere else and I'm learning about colonialism, I come with that frame, I guess, you know what I mean? Like I come with that knowledge. Anyway, coming here, I'm just left confused, I think. I was about to say that it seems very different here, but I don't know that it's very different here. Like I'm only just starting to touch the surface of various narratives. And so I don't know how violent colonization was here. I don't really understand it. There's a huge difference between Australian colonization and New Zealand colonization because there's a treaty in New Zealand, whereas in Australia there's no treaty, apart from in Victoria, but that's like a very recent treaty and there's only one state. And so that treaty brings with it a whole huge conversation. And again, I'm saying I feel dumb. I don't know the answers. For example, in Australia, in kind of Aboriginal activism and when talking about colonisation, a lot of the times people will say this land was never ceded. There was never a moment in time when Aboriginal Australians officially ceded sovereignty of any sort to the British. It's never happened. But with a treaty, I don't know if that statement is the same here in New Zealand, if you could say that this land was never ceded because there's a treaty. Also, one of the plaques on the wall was saying that there was like kind of like extensive argument or extensive debate or extensive consultation with the Maori people when that treaty was created. But I don't know if that's true. That's kind of one of those stories that makes me wonder if that's like kind of, you know, we're in an art gallery that's funded by a certain government, I assume, and so, you know, perhaps certain narratives sneak their way through. It kind of seems to me like they might be, so far, sanitizing the story of colonialism here. I've only gotten a couple rooms into this exhibit, so there's that. But I haven't seen any depictions of kind of violence or police or, you know, like all that sort of thing. And I don't know if those sorts of things have happened. I've been reading Jacinta Ardern's book. Turns out her dad was a police officer. And kind of her story so far, again, I'm only a few chapters in, we'll find out. But her story so far about police has been a very rosy picture of policing in New Zealand. And she mentioned at some point that sometimes there is police oversteps. Maybe, I think she might have used the word brutality. I can't remember. It makes me wonder if all these sorts of things are coming together to paint a more rosy picture about the story of colonialisation in New Zealand than maybe is kind of accurate. And this is like particularly pertinent to me right now because of the social media stories that I've been getting coming in from Sydney, basically. Like yesterday, there were people protesting a very violent colonial regime. I'm sure you can guess the one. A member from that regime coming to Australia to visit and has been invited. The red carpet's been laid out by our Prime Minister. And people were protesting that, and a lot of people were hurt by police. Don't want to use any words that could be specifically legal words, but like a lot of people were hurt by police. And that's been well documented on social media, lots of footage of that. So I think that seeing all of that, reading this book, looking at that, seeing the kind of stories I've seen so far about treaties and that sort of thing, so far it's making it look like it maybe was a more peaceful history than it might have been. Some further reflections I have after having finished the Maori section are that I think that it does cover dispossession. I don't know if there's a lot more that there is to cover because I obviously don't know my Maori history, embarrassingly. It mentions the New Zealand Wars, which I've never heard of before, so getting me educated. Actually, it took a different interpretation. Okay, so a picture that it had, I'll put it up here. I'll put it up here, but there's a picture drawn by a white artist, you know, a couple hundred years ago during the early colonial period. And to me, having seen what like artists would do to other black bodies, to me it wasn't the most derogatory picture that could have been drawn. But the interpretation by the person who wrote the little plaque next to it was that, and I agree with this, like the way that the people in the picture are framed creates this like distance between you as like the kind of like knowledgeable onlooker sort of thing and the people who the picture is depicting, and it kind of like depicts them as curiosities, I think is what the plaque sort of said, and I agree with that. But I also find it interesting because there was another picture which to me was definitely of the sort which I think of when I think of really problematic depictions of colonized people. Like they tried to kind of dehumanize them in the drawing, and that was kind of the one in that whole gallery which I kind of thought was like, this is clearly drawn with the intention to. But yeah, I think overall the gallery was very interesting. It definitely educated me a bit, which was my whole intent on going there. I will try to find more Maori history stuff while I'm here. I'll have plenty of opportunities, hopefully. And now I think I'm just going to go home and rest for a bit. But it was a very interesting time here at the Auckland Museum. Way more engaging than I thought it would be. I thought they would have way less stuff than they did, and I thought that the kind of discussions that would be, you know, like on the side next to the artworks that they have, I thought they would be less kind of intelligent, because I'm not used to seeing really good criticisms like the one I just mentioned about where like the framing of the group of individuals in the artwork makes them look like curiosities. Like those sorts of discussions I'm not used to seeing on the sides of museum plaques, and so that was very impressive. Overall, I'd recommend the Auckland Museum if you come here. I've just finished my time at the War Memorial. Level 1 has a section called Maori Natural History. That section covers a lot of pre-colonial history of Maori people, as well as Maori kind of spiritual beliefs and understandings about how the world works, cosmologies, and those sorts of things. As well as, it taught me that pre-colonization, the Maori had agriculture, which I didn't know. It also shows like the history of certain animals moving down through different Pacific islands down to New Zealand, and how the Maori had those animals, I guess, domesticated and bred and used for certain things, like there's dogs, they had dogs. There's a section called New Zealand at War. It doesn't seem like they've settled on a name for them. I saw some people referring to them as the New Zealand lands, and then other, you know, this is just kind of calling it the New Zealand. But that's about the real history of violence and dispossession of Maori people from their land, and that's kind of what I was looking for, because I was like, not that the art gallery yesterday was necessarily out there trying to say that it was a peaceful history, it just wasn't talking much about the full history of settlement. They have a volcano section, they have a special exhibit on sharks. The lady that said I'm from Sydney, she's like, oh, we have a shark here from you guys. So, oh, cool. Great to hear that we're being portrayed in that way. I think I just need to reiterate how incredibly lucky I feel to be here. Everyone's so lovely and it's such a beautiful city. I feel so incredibly lucky. And that's all I have to say. Hello everyone!